My husband found out I was pregnant and screamed, "That's not my child," and threw my things into the street. But 2 days later, a lawyer called me. "Ma'am, your father left you his entire fortune, $84 million, but there is one condition." Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always ask me when I knew. When did I first feel it? That cold, quiet shift in the air, the kind that tells you something is wrong before your mind has words for it. Looking back now, I can say it started long before the night Marcus threw my suitcase onto the front lawn. It started with small things, the kind of small things a woman in love learns to explain away. My name is Claire Whitfield. I was 34 years old, living in a 4-bedroom colonial in Naperville, Illinois, married to Marcus Reed for 6 years. On paper, we had everything. A house with a wraparound porch, 2 cars in the driveway, a golden retriever named Biscuit who slept at the foot of our bed. Marcus was a commercial real estate broker. Charming, well-dressed, the kind of man who remembered everyone's name at a party. I worked as a senior editor at a mid-sized publishing house in Chicago, commuting 3 days a week and working from home the rest. We weren't perfect, but I believed we were solid. I believed in us the way you believe in gravity, without needing proof. Then I got pregnant. It wasn't planned, but it wasn't unwelcome either. I was 11 weeks along when I finally told him. I remember standing in our kitchen, the November light coming gray and thin through the window, holding a mug of chamomile tea I wasn't drinking. Marcus was eating breakfast, barely looking up from his phone. I said the words. I watched his face. He didn't smile. He set down his fork, very slowly, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before. It wasn't shock. It wasn't joy. It was something harder and more calculated, like a man running numbers in his head. "How far along?" he asked. 11 weeks, I said. He nodded once and said nothing else. I told myself he was surprised. I told myself he needed time. But in the weeks before that morning, there had been other things I had already started cataloging without realizing it. The weeknight client dinners that ran until 11. The new habit of leaving the room when his phone rang. The way he had stopped reaching for me in bed, not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. The way warmth leaves a house when the furnace quietly fails. There had been a name, too. Danielle. I had seen it on his screen twice, once in October, once in early November. He told me she was a colleague handling a downtown development project. I believed him. Or I made myself believe him, which is not quite the same thing. I also noticed that around the 6th week of my pregnancy, Marcus began asking strange questions, casual questions, slipped into ordinary conversation. "Your father's not doing well, is he?" My father, Gerald Whitfield, had been ill for some time, a slow cardiac decline that his doctors had been managing carefully for 2 years. Marcus had never shown much interest in my father's health before. The questions unsettled me, but I couldn't find a shape for my suspicion. Not yet. The night everything broke open was a Wednesday in late November. I had come home from Chicago earlier than expected, my train catching a rare on-time connection. I walked into our house to find Marcus on the back patio, speaking in a low, urgent voice into his phone. He saw me through the glass door and ended the call immediately. When I asked who he was talking to, he said it was a contractor. The way he said it, too fast, too smooth, made my stomach tighten. We ate dinner in near silence. I cleared the table. I was standing at the sink when he walked up behind me and said, without preamble, without softness, I need you to be honest with me, Claire. Is this baby mine? I turned around slowly. I stared at him. What? You heard me. Marcus, what do you even... Of course it's yours. What are you talking about? His jaw tightened. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I've been thinking. The timing doesn't add up. The timing adds up perfectly, I said, my voice going very quiet. We're married. I want a paternity test. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. I felt the ripples go all the way through me. Fine, I said, fine. I'll take whatever test you want. And then I need you to explain to me what is actually going on. He didn't explain. What he did instead was walk upstairs. I heard him moving around in our bedroom, drawers opening, the closet. I stood in the kitchen, frozen, listening. 20 minutes later, he came back down carrying 2 of my suitcases. He walked past me, opened the front door, and set them on the porch. I think you should stay somewhere else tonight, he said. I looked at my suitcases sitting on the lawn in the November cold. I looked at the man I had loved for 8 years, including the 2 before we married. And I thought, who are you? And how long have I been living with a stranger? I didn't cry. Not then. I called my best friend Renata, picked up my bags, and drove away. Renata Okafor lived 20 minutes away in Oak Park, in a narrow brick townhouse she shared with her 2 cats and an organized chaos of art supplies. She was a freelance illustrator and the closest thing I had to a sister. When I knocked on her door at 9:30 that Wednesday night, still wearing my work coat, suitcases on her step, she took one look at my face and pulled me inside without a word. I sat at her kitchen table and told her everything. The accusation, the suitcases on the lawn, the name Danielle, the questions about my father. Renata listened without interrupting, which was rare for her. When I finished, she poured 2 glasses of water and placed one in front of me. He's having an affair, she said. Not a question. I think so, I said, and he's trying to make you the villain before you figure that out. I hadn't thought of it in exactly those terms, but the moment she said it, something clicked into place. It wasn't just anger on his part, it was strategy. The accusation that the baby wasn't his, that wasn't grief or jealousy talking. That was a man building a narrative, a man preparing for something. But preparing for what? I slept poorly. In the morning, I called into work, said I had a family emergency, which wasn't entirely untrue, and spent 2 hours sitting on Renata's couch, making a mental inventory of my life. Our joint accounts held roughly $40,000. The house in Naperville was in both our names, purchased primarily with Marcus's income, but I had contributed significantly to the mortgage over 6 years. I had my own salary, good but not wealthy. I had a car. I had my health insurance through my employer. I had an 11-week pregnancy and no idea where my marriage stood. The fear was real. It sat in my chest like a cold stone. But underneath it, something else was quietly hardening. A decision. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew I was not going to disappear quietly. I was not going to accept the role Marcus had cast me in. On Thursday afternoon, my phone rang, an Illinois number I didn't recognize. May I speak with Claire Whitfield? Speaking. Ms. Whitfield, my name is Daniel Cho. I'm a partner at Hargrove & Cho, an estate law firm in Chicago. I'm calling regarding the estate of Gerald Whitfield. I gripped the phone. My father had died 4 days earlier, a cardiac event that his doctors had warned us was possible, though the finality of it still hadn't fully reached me. I had taken the call from the hospital Monday morning, driven downstate for 2 days to handle the immediate arrangements with my younger brother Paul, and come home to find my marriage collapsing on top of my grief. "Yes," I said carefully, "your father left a will, Ms. Whitfield. He executed it 14 months ago with our firm. I'd like to schedule a meeting at your earliest convenience to discuss its contents. There are some provisions that require your personal attention. Can you tell me anything now?" A brief pause. "Your father named you as the sole beneficiary of his estate. The total value, including property, investments, and liquid assets, has been assessed at approximately $84 million. The room seemed to shift. "I'm sorry," I said. "How much?" $84 million, Ms. Whitfield. Your father was a careful man. He had significant holdings in agricultural land and energy stocks that appreciated considerably over the past decade. However," and here Daniel Cho's voice became measured, precise, "there is a condition attached to the bequest. Your father specified that you must be legally separated or divorced from your current spouse, Marcus Reed, within 12 months of the date of Gerald Whitfield's death in order to receive the full inheritance. If you remain married to Mr. Reed beyond that period, the estate passes to a charitable trust." I said nothing for a long moment. "He knew," I finally said, "not to Daniel Cho, to myself. My father had known about Marcus. He had never liked him, never trusted him, and I had dismissed his reservations as old-fashioned protectiveness. But Gerald Whitfield had been a quietly observant man. He had seen something in Marcus that I had refused to see, and he had, in his careful way, tried to protect me even from beyond his own life. "Ms. Whitfield?" "Yes, I'll come in tomorrow, whatever time works for you." After I ended the call, I sat very still for several minutes. Then I took out a notepad, an actual paper notepad because I didn't trust my phone, and I began to write. Not feelings, not grief, a list. What I knew, what I needed to prove, what I needed to do, and in what order. Marcus had thrown me out of our home while I was carrying his child. He had accused me of infidelity. He was almost certainly having an affair himself, and now it appeared he had a financial motive, because if I inherited $84 million, he stood to gain enormously as my spouse, or more precisely, as my husband during a divorce. Was that what he had been preparing for? Not to leave me, but to position himself to profit from leaving me at exactly the right moment? I looked at my list. I drew a line under it, and I wrote at the top, in capital letters, "Evidence first, everything else second." The first plan had begun. The offices of Hargrove and Cho were on the 31st floor of a building on Wacker Drive, with a view of the Chicago River going gray-green under December clouds. Daniel Cho was younger than I expected, late 40s, methodical, with the kind of careful manner that inspires confidence without warmth. He walked me through the will in detail. My father had been thorough. The condition was unambiguous. 12 months from Gerald Whitfield's death, November 18th of the following year. Either I was legally separated from Marcus Reed by that date, or $84 million went to a land conservation trust. I asked Daniel one question before I left. If Marcus were to claim a share of this inheritance as my spouse, would he have grounds? Daniel folded his hands on the desk. Illinois is an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. An inheritance received by one spouse is generally considered separate property, particularly if it is kept in a separate account and not commingled with marital assets. Your father's attorneys structured this precisely to protect it. However, a spouse can attempt to claim indirect contributions or other arguments during divorce proceedings. The cleaner and faster the separation, the less exposure there is." "I understand," I said. I left his office and walked 4 blocks to a different building where I had a second appointment, one I had made that morning. The office of Patricia Vance, a family law attorney with a reputation in Cook County for being thorough and unsparing. I had found her name through Renata, who had used her for a lease dispute and described her as the kind of woman who reads the fine print before she even says hello. Patricia was exactly that. She was in her mid-50s, silver-haired, with reading glasses she used like punctuation. I sat across from her and laid out my situation from the beginning. The marriage, the pregnancy, the accusation, the suitcases on the lawn, the phone calls, the name Danielle, and now the inheritance. "Do you have documentation of the night he removed you from the home?" she asked. I took photos of the suitcases on the porch before I left, and I texted Renata from the driveway. "Timestamps?" "Yes." She nodded, making notes. "We'll want to establish the constructive abandonment. He asked you to leave the marital home. That has legal weight. And the paternity accusation. Do you intend to take the test?" "Immediately," I said. "I want that settled on record. The child is his." "Good. A confirmed paternity result protects both you and the child in any subsequent proceedings. Now, about the affair. Do you have evidence?" "Not yet," I said. "Not hard evidence." Patricia looked at me over her glasses. "Get some." I knew she was right. A suspicion was nothing. A name on a phone screen was nothing. I needed something that would stand up. Something documented, time-stamped, real. I didn't hire a private investigator immediately. What I did first was think carefully about what I already had access to. Marcus and I had a shared family plan on our phone carrier. I was, in fact, the primary account holder. The plan had been set up in my name when we first moved to Naperville, and Marcus had been between contracts. I had never changed it. The next morning, from Renata's kitchen table, I logged into the carrier's account portal. I was not accessing his messages. I was not intercepting calls. I was simply reviewing the call and data logs on an account in my name. Entirely legal, as Patricia had confirmed in a follow-up text when I described what I intended to do. What I found was a pattern so consistent it felt almost mechanical. Every weekday between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., and again after 9 p.m., there were calls to the same number, dozens of them, some lasting 40 minutes or more. The number itself wasn't labeled in any records I had access to, but I wrote it down. Meanwhile, something was shifting on Marcus's end. I noticed it first when he called me, which he hadn't done since the night he put my bags outside. He called on a Friday afternoon, his voice calibrated to something that was supposed to sound like remorse. "Claire, we need to talk. I overreacted. Can we sit down together?" "We can talk through my attorney," I said. A pause. "You have an attorney?" "I do." Another pause, longer this time. "Claire, we don't need to involve lawyers. I want to work this out." "Then your attorney can contact mine," I said, and ended the call. Within an hour, Renata sent me a screenshot. She had a mutual acquaintance, a woman named Gwen who moved in the same suburban social circles as Marcus, and Gwen had reached out to Renata asking whether I was doing okay, because apparently Marcus had been telling people at the Naperville Athletic Club that I had left suddenly due to emotional instability. He was already shaping the story. I filed it away. Evidence of character, if nothing else. The actual turning point came 9 days after I left the house. Renata had driven me to a prenatal appointment in the city. We were walking back to her car on Michigan Avenue, passing through the lobby of a hotel that connected to the parking structure, when I saw them. Marcus and a woman I didn't know, sitting at a small table in the hotel bar, which was visible through a glass partition from the lobby. He was leaning toward her in that way he used to lean toward me, focused, intimate. She was in her early 30s, dark-haired, wearing a fitted blazer. His hand was on top of hers on the table. Renata saw them the same moment I did. She grabbed my arm. I didn't walk in. I didn't make a scene. I took out my phone and took 3 photographs through the glass partition, time-stamped, clear, showing both faces. Then I turned and walked to the elevator. My hands were shaking, but my mind was absolutely still. Because now I had proof. Now I had a point of no return. And I knew, without any doubt, that I was going to use it. Patricia Vance moved quickly once I gave her everything. The photographs from the hotel lobby, the call logs from the phone carrier account, the text record from the night Marcus put my bags on the porch, the paternity test results, which came back 2 weeks later in a document from a certified AABB-accredited laboratory confirming, unambiguously, that Marcus Reed was the biological father of the child I was carrying. I had the test done proactively, without his request and without a court order. Patricia said it was one of the smartest things I'd done. It removes the accusation from the table before he has a chance to use it as leverage, she told me. He brought it up to destabilize you. Now it's neutralized. I also authorized Patricia to send formal notice to Marcus's legal representation, because by that point, Marcus had retained an attorney named Stephen Graft, who was known in Cook County family law circles as someone who played the long game and billed accordingly. The notice stated that I was initiating formal separation proceedings, that I was the primary account holder on the marital phone plan, and that all communications between Marcus and me should go through counsel. I had also, quietly, opened a new individual bank account with a separate institution and requested that my direct deposit be redirected there. Nothing from the joint account was touched. Patricia was clear about that. Don't move $1 from anything joint. Let him be the one to do something irregular. I was staying in Renata's guest room, working from her kitchen table with a laptop and a HIPAA-approved fetal monitoring app my OB had recommended. The pregnancy was progressing well. 14 weeks. I had seen the heartbeat twice. I had told no one outside of Renata and Patricia and Daniel Cho about the inheritance. That was a deliberate choice, and it turned out to be the right one. Because on a Tuesday morning in mid-December, Marcus appeared at Renata's door. I was in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. Renata answered it, and I heard his voice. Calm, reasonable, the voice he used when he was performing patience. I walked to the hallway. "I'd like to speak with my wife," he said. "She'll speak with you through her attorney," Renata said. "Renata, come on. This is a private family matter." "Then you should call her attorney." Renata began to close the door. Marcus put his hand on the frame, not forcefully, just enough to stop it. "Claire." He was looking past Renata at me. "I know you've been talking to a lawyer about my father-in-law's will. I need you to understand something. Whatever you think you're doing, it's not going to play out the way you think." I stepped forward. "Take your hand off Renata's door, Marcus." He studied me for a moment. Then he removed his hand. "There's a clause in Illinois marital law," he said, "about assets acquired during the marriage. I have an attorney who is very confident that—" "My attorney is aware of Illinois law," I said. "As am I. Goodbye, Marcus." I closed the door myself. My heart was hammering, but my face had been completely still. What I didn't know until the next day when Patricia called was that Marcus and Stephen Graft had filed a motion to have all marital assets frozen pending the divorce proceedings. It was a pressure tactic. an attempt to lock up our joint finances and make my situation uncomfortable enough that I might negotiate from weakness. Patricia had anticipated it. She filed a counter motion immediately, citing the documented constructive abandonment and requesting that I be granted continued access to my separate account and salary while the joint assets remained in supervised escrow. The judge granted our counter motion within 3 days. Then came Danielle. Her full name I learned through Patricia's investigator. Yes, I had authorized a licensed investigator by that point. Was Danielle Marsh. She was a commercial real estate associate at a different firm from Marcus's, which was how they had met, presumably on one of those client projects. She was 31, unmarried, and had been in contact with Marcus for at least 14 months. The investigator had documented 3 instances of them entering the same hotel, 2 different ones, and had photographic records with timestamps. On a Thursday evening, Danielle Marsh called me. I don't know how she got my number. Perhaps Marcus gave it to her. Perhaps she found it some other way. She was composed when she spoke, not apologetic, not aggressive, almost businesslike. "I think we should meet," she said, "woman to woman. I think there are things you should understand before this goes further." "I understand everything I need to," I said. "Claire, don't call me that, and don't call this number again. If you want to communicate with me, contact my attorney." I gave her Patricia's office number, read it off slowly, and hung up. That night, sitting in Renata's spare room with a cup of chamomile tea, the same kind I'd been holding in my kitchen the morning I told Marcus about the pregnancy, I let myself feel everything I had been carefully containing: the grief, the humiliation, the exhaustion of being 11 weeks pregnant and then 14 weeks and now 17, navigating this alone, waking up in someone else's guest room with my files in a tote bag and my whole life restructuring around me. I let myself feel it for one evening. I cried. I called my brother Paul, who had known something was wrong with Marcus for years and had never pushed me on it, and I told him a careful version of the truth. He was quiet for a while, and then he said, "You're going to be okay, Claire. You're the toughest person I know, and you don't even know it." I took 3 days. I slept. I ate properly. I walked in the winter cold along Renata's street with Renata beside me, talking about nothing important: her commissions, her cats, a movie we'd both wanted to see. I let myself be a person for 72 hours, not just a claimant in a legal proceeding. Then I came back to the table. There was still work to do. The first attempt at temptation came through Stephen Graft, who sent Patricia a formal proposal in the 2nd week of January. It was framed as a good faith settlement offer, and it was, on its surface, almost reasonable, or at least designed to look that way. Marcus would relinquish any claim to the marital home. I would receive a lump sum payment of $200,000 and primary custody of the child. Marcus would request reasonable visitation and pay standard Illinois child support. The offer included, buried in the final clause, a mutual non-disclosure agreement. Patricia called me the morning she received it and read me the NDA clause in full. "He wants me to sign away my ability to discuss any of this publicly," I said. "In exchange for the house and the payment, yes." I was quiet for a moment, looking out the window of Renata's kitchen at the January street, bare-limbed and salt gray. "He doesn't know about the inheritance yet," I said. "If he did, this offer would look very different." "I believe you're right," Patricia said. "Decline it. All of it. All of it. I don't want his settlement. I don't want the house under those terms. And I will not sign an NDA. decline it with a formal counter that we are willing to discuss a parenting plan once paternity is on record, which we now have, and that all other financial matters will proceed through standard discovery. There was a brief silence. I could hear Patricia making a note. "You're sure?" she said. It wasn't a question. She was checking. "I'm sure." The second attempt came in a different form, and it surprised me. My mother-in-law, Sandra Reed, called me on a Sunday. Sandra and I had always had a careful, cordial relationship. She was not warm, but she was not unkind, and she had always treated me with a certain measured respect. When she called, she asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, partly because I didn't want to antagonize her unnecessarily, and partly because I was curious about what she'd been asked to say. We met at a cafe in Evanston. Neutral ground, her suggestion. She looked older than the last time I'd seen her. She ordered tea, wrapped both hands around the cup, and looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between apology and appeal. "Marcus is in a bad place," she said. "I understand that," I said. "He made mistakes. He knows that. But Claire, he's my son, and this baby is my grandchild. I'm asking you to think about what a long legal battle does to a family." "I am thinking about that," I said. "I think about my child every day." Sandra leaned forward slightly. "He would consider counseling. Couples counseling, I mean. A real commitment, not just talk. He said to tell you that." I looked at her. Sandra Reed was not a cruel woman. I believed in that moment that she genuinely meant what she was saying. I also believed that Marcus had sent her, had coached her, probably, and that the counseling suggestion was a door designed to lead back to the same house where he'd put my suitcases on the lawn at 9 o'clock on a Wednesday night, while Danielle Marsh's name was in his recent calls. "Sandra," I said gently, "I appreciate that you came. I know this is hard for you too, but Marcus didn't just make a mistake. There was a pattern. There was another woman. There was a deliberate attempt to undermine me when I was most vulnerable. Counseling can't undo what's already been documented." She sat back. Something moved across her face. Not quite surprise, but close to it. "Documented." "Yes," I said simply. She didn't ask what I meant. She finished her tea. We said goodbye at the door, politely, without coldness, and I walked back to my car. That week, 3 things happened that reminded me I was not alone in this. Renata organized what she called a completely unofficial and totally mandatory dinner at her house, and she invited 5 women she knew I loved and trusted. My college friend Mara, my colleague Simone from the publishing house, our mutual friend Deb, who had gone through her own divorce 4 years earlier, Renata's neighbor Joe, and my cousin Elise, who drove in from Milwaukee specifically to be there. They brought food and wine, sparkling water for me, and nobody asked me to be strong or inspirational. They just sat with me. Mara made me laugh about something completely unrelated. Simone told me she'd quietly been rerouting my most important manuscripts to a home office queue so I didn't have to come into Chicago unless I wanted to. Deb, who had once sat exactly where I was sitting, said, "The worst part isn't the fighting, it's the waiting." "But you're further along than you think." I believed her. I also found in those weeks that my own discipline surprised me. I had always thought of myself as someone who felt things deeply and visibly. An editor's sensitivity, perhaps, a reader's empathy. But in this period, I discovered a different layer beneath that, a stillness, a capacity for patience that I hadn't known I possessed. I waited. I let Marcus and Danielle and Stephen Graft read the silence and try to interpret it. I gave them nothing. They were watching. I could feel it, and I let them watch. They came on a Saturday morning in late January, and they came together, which told me everything. I had moved, by then, from Renata's guest room into a furnished one-bedroom apartment in Lincoln Park that I had leased on a 6-month basis using my own salary. It was modest but clean, high ceilings, decent light, close enough to my OB's office that I could walk in good weather. I was 20 weeks pregnant. At my last appointment, the doctor had confirmed everything was developing normally, and I had learned, sitting alone in that examination room with the ultrasound screen, that I was having a girl. I had told only Renata and Paul. On Saturday morning, I was eating breakfast when the intercom buzzed. I looked at the building's door camera feed on my phone. Marcus was standing at the entry, and beside him, not Danielle, which would have been almost too obvious, but Sandra, his mother. The same Sandra I had met for tea in Evanston. They had brought, I noticed, a small plant in a ceramic pot, a prop. I buzzed them up because refusing felt at that moment like the more volatile choice. If they wanted to talk, I would let them talk. Patricia had reminded me more than once, don't give them chaos to use against you. Be the person in the room who is calmest. Marcus looked uncomfortable when I opened the door. Sandra looked resolved. I let them in, offered nothing, and sat down in the armchair across from the sofa, leaving the sofa for them. "We should have called ahead," Sandra said. "Yes," I agreed pleasantly. Marcus cleared his throat. "Claire, I want to be honest with you. I've handled this badly. I know that. I'm not here to make excuses." He paused, clearly having rehearsed this. "But I am here to ask you to think about the bigger picture. We're going to have a child in 4 months. Whatever happened between us, whatever mistakes were made, we owe it to her to find a way to do this without destroying each other." I noticed he said her. He knew it was a girl. How did he know? I hadn't told him. Had Sandra told him? Had someone else? I filed the question away and kept my face still. "I agree completely that our child's well-being is the priority," I said. He leaned forward. "Then let's talk about withdrawing the formal proceedings. We can work this out privately, between ourselves. The lawyers are making everything worse. If you just—" "Marcus," I said quietly, "what are you asking me to do, specifically?" He spread his hands. "Pause the legal process. Give us time to talk. Maybe 6 months, just stop the clock." 6 months, until after the inheritance deadline passed, or close enough to create complications. Was he aware of the condition in my father's will? Or was this coincidental? I couldn't be certain, but the request itself was clear. Delay. Slow down. Give him time to regroup. "I'm not going to pause the proceedings," I said. Sandra spoke. "Claire, I understand you're hurt, but you're making permanent decisions during a very emotional time. I am making careful decisions during a very consequential time," I said. "That's different." I looked at her with something I hoped was kindness, because I didn't dislike Sandra Reed. "I know you're trying to protect your son. I understand that, but I'm trying to protect my daughter, and those two things are not compatible right now." Marcus's composure shifted. The performance of reasonableness cracked, just slightly. A tightening around the eyes, a harder set to his jaw. "You're being unbelievably stubborn," he said. "Do you understand what you're walking away from? The house, the life we built. I'm offering you a chance to step back from all of this before it gets worse." "Worse for whom?" I asked. "For both of us." "I think you mean worse for you," I said, "and I think you're right about that." He stood up. Sandra stood with him, touching his arm. Whether to restrain him or support him, I couldn't tell. Marcus looked at me for a long moment, and the mask was almost entirely gone by then. What I saw underneath it was not the man I married. It was something more calculating and more frightened. "You'll regret this," he said. I didn't answer. I walked to the door and opened it. After they left, I stood in my kitchen for a long time. My hands were wrapped around a glass of water, and they were very slightly trembling. Not from fear in the ordinary sense, not from any belief that Marcus would harm me physically, but from the sheer weight of it, the knowledge that this man who had slept beside me for 6 years, who had promised me things in front of a room full of people we loved, was now standing in my apartment making veiled threats about regret. Was I afraid? Yes, a little. In the way you are afraid when you realize the person on the other side of a negotiation has nothing left to lose and isn't thinking clearly. But I discovered something in that trembling. The fear didn't hollow me out, it filled me. It compressed into something dense and hard, and that hard thing was certainty. I was going to finish this. The deposition was scheduled for the first Thursday of March. Patricia had requested it as part of the formal discovery process, a standard proceeding in which Marcus would answer questions under oath about the financial history of our marriage, including the circumstances under which I had been removed from the marital home. Stephen Graft had objected 3 times through procedural motions, and each time the judge, a woman named the Honorable Carolyn Mead, who had been on the Cook County Family Court bench for 11 years, had denied the objection. I sat in a conference room on the 22nd floor of Patricia's building, with Patricia beside me and a court reporter at the end of the table. Marcus came in with Stephen Graft and a younger associate I didn't recognize. He was dressed in his most trustworthy clothes. Navy blazer, no tie, the outfit that said, "reasonable man." He didn't look at me when he sat down. The first 40 minutes were straightforward. Financial history, mortgage payments, account records. Marcus answered carefully, measuring every word, and Stephen Graft objected when the questions came near anything uncomfortable. Patricia was patient. She was building something, and she was in no hurry. Then she asked about Danielle Marsh. Marcus said they were colleagues. Patricia acknowledged that and asked about the 14 months of phone records. Marcus said it was business. Patricia produced the phone logs, organized by date, time, duration, and walked him through 14 specific calls, each lasting over 30 minutes, placed after 9 in the evening. "Were these all business calls?" Patricia asked. "Some were social," Marcus said carefully. "We're friends." "And the hotel records?" Stephen Graft said. "Objection, relevance." Patricia said pleasantly, "The financial implications of an extramarital relationship that began during the marriage are directly relevant to asset division under Illinois law, Your Honor." The judge, who was present by video link for this segment, said, "Overruled. Continue." Patricia produced the investigator's documentation, not the photographs I had taken through the glass partition. Those were supplementary, but the investigator's time-stamped certified records, 2 separate hotels, the dates, the duration of the visits. Marcus looked at the documents. Something shifted in his posture. It wasn't. He stopped. He glanced at Stephen Graft. Stephen Graft's face was professionally neutral, but I could see the effort in it. "Were you in a romantic relationship with Danielle Marsh during your marriage to Claire Whitfield?" Patricia asked. A long pause. "I need a moment to confer with my attorney," Marcus said. "Of course," Patricia said. She checked something in her notes. The court reporter waited, hands folded. I looked at the table in front of me. My own hands were folded on top of my notepad, completely still. They conferred in low, urgent voices for 4 minutes. When Marcus came back on record, he said, "I developed feelings for Ms. Marsh over the course of the past year. We did have a relationship. It was not physical for the majority of that period." He was choosing his words with surgical precision, trying to minimize. Patricia nodded. "Thank you. Now, when did you develop these feelings, approximately?" "I'm not certain of the exact timeline." "Would it surprise you to know that Ms. Marsh has provided a voluntary statement to my office?" Patricia said. The room went very still. Marcus's eyes moved to her face. "I'm sorry?" "Danielle Marsh provided a written statement to my office on February 24th. She describes a relationship that became physical in September of last year. That's approximately 15 months before today's date. And she has provided text records that she retained." Patricia slid a document across the table. "This is a copy." Stephen Graft reached for it first. Marcus reached for it at the same time. Their hands collided on the table. It was a small moment, but in a room that quiet, it was loud. I had known about the statement for 3 weeks. Patricia had reached out to Danielle Marsh, not to negotiate or threaten, but simply to inform her that she might be called as a witness in discovery proceedings. Danielle had apparently weighed her position carefully and concluded that providing a voluntary statement on her own terms was preferable to being subpoenaed. She was protecting herself. People in her position often do. What the statement contained, and what now sat in front of Marcus Reed as he read it, his face going through several colors, was a detailed account of the relationship, including specific conversations in which Marcus had discussed his plans for the marriage, including one conversation in early November in which he had told Danielle that his father-in-law was dying and that Claire might be coming into money and that timing was everything. He had known about the inheritance before I had. He had been calculating his position for months. Marcus set down the document. He looked up, and for the first time since I had walked into that conference room, he looked directly at me. And what I saw on his face was not guilt, exactly. It was the look of a man who had been running a play and had just watched it collapse. "This is," he started. "You can address any questions to me, Mr. Reed," Patricia said. He turned to her. "This is a betrayal of... She had no..." He stopped again. His composure, that careful navy blazer reasonableness, was gone. "She went behind my back." "Who did?" Patricia asked pleasantly. "Danielle." He caught himself. Stephen Graft put a hand briefly on his arm. Marcus sat back. He pressed his mouth into a line. He was trying, visibly and unsuccessfully, to reassemble himself. "Mr. Reed," Patricia said, "did you become aware of Gerald Whitfield's estate and its potential value prior to the date of his death?" A very long pause. "I was aware he had assets," Marcus said. "Were you aware of the condition attached to the bequest to your wife?" Another pause. Longer. "I had heard something to that effect," Marcus said. The court reporter typed on. "I sat with my hands folded on my notepad in that conference room on the 22nd floor and felt, not triumph, not satisfaction exactly, but something quieter. The still, clear feeling of a thing being what it actually is. The truth had a shape now. It was in the record. It was under oath. It was finished. The divorce was finalized on September 9th, 10 weeks before the deadline in my father's will. Judge Carolyn Mead had presided over the final hearing, and she had not been lenient. The deposition record, The investigator's documentation, Danielle Marsh's statement, and the phone logs had collectively painted a picture that left very little room for Stephen Graft's preferred interpretation of events. Marcus had attempted to frame the marriage's breakdown as mutual, as a gradual, unhappy dissolution with no single responsible party. Judge Meade had reviewed the evidence and declined that framing. Her findings were precise. Marcus Reed had engaged in an ongoing extramarital relationship during the marriage, beginning approximately 15 months prior to the separation. He had made a documented accusation of infidelity against his wife, an accusation conclusively disproved by certified paternity testing, which the court characterized as an attempt to gain leverage in anticipation of the marital dissolution. He had removed the plaintiff from the marital home on November 20th without legal grounds, constituting constructive abandonment under Illinois law, and the court had taken note, in carefully measured language, but note nonetheless, of testimony establishing that Mr. Reed had been aware of the potential inheritance and had been, by his own admission, considering the timing of the marital proceedings in that context. The marital home in Naperville was awarded to me. Marcus received his personal property, his car, and his retirement account, which was divided according to the standard formula. He received no portion of my inheritance, which Daniel Cho's firm had structured impeccably as separate property. He received no NDA. He received a parenting plan, joint legal custody, with primary physical custody to me, with a child support obligation calculated by the court based on his income, not on mine. He had, in short, gained nothing. Everything he had maneuvered for, the financial advantage, the narrative control, the inheritance-adjacent divorce payout, had been methodically dismantled over 9 months of careful, documented work. Stephen Graft filed 2 appeals of interim rulings. Both were denied within 6 weeks of filing. On the day the second denial came through, Patricia called me at home, and I could hear, beneath her professional restraint, something close to satisfaction. "We're done," she said. "It's over." The inheritance transferred to my account on November 3rd, 15 days before the deadline. Daniel Cho's office processed the final documentation without incident. I had already established a separate trust for my daughter's future, with Renata and Paul named as trustees alongside me. The money was real. It was mine. And Marcus Reed had no claim on any of it. There was one final moment that I will keep. 2 days after the divorce was finalized, Marcus called me, not through his attorney for the first time in months. I answered because by then I could afford to. "I want you to know," he said, "that I didn't plan everything the way it looked. Some of it just happened." "I know," I said. "That's the version you'll tell yourself. That's fine, Marcus." A pause. "I'm sorry about your father," he said. And I believed in that moment that this part was true. My father had been a difficult man, precise and quiet and not easy to love, but Marcus had known him, and there was something in his voice that sounded unscripted. "Thank you," I said. "How is—" He stopped. Started again. "How's the pregnancy?" "She's healthy," I said. "She's perfect." I didn't offer anything else. We said goodbye. I ended the call and sat in the kitchen of the house in Naperville, my house now, with the November light coming through the window, and I looked at the room where I had once stood holding a cup of chamomile tea, waiting to tell my husband we were going to have a child. The room looked exactly the same. I was entirely different. My daughter was born on February 27th at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago at 6:43 in the morning. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. a full head of dark hair, and, from the first moment she opened her eyes, an expression of absolute and unimpressed focus that made the delivery nurse laugh out loud. I named her Alice Gerald Whitfield Reed. Alice for my maternal grandmother, Gerald for my father. I kept Reed because it was her father's name and it belonged to her, not to my feelings about him. Renata was in the waiting room. Paul had driven through the night from downstate and arrived 20 minutes after Alice did. When he held her for the first time, his eyes filled completely. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Marcus came to the hospital the following day. He was not a villain at that bedside. He was a man who had done wrong things for calculated reasons, now standing at the edge of a life he had lost. He held Alice for 15 minutes. He was careful with her. When he left, he stopped at the door and said, "Thank you for letting me be here." I nodded. That was all. We had a detailed parenting plan and communicated through an app that logged every message. When disagreements arose, and they did, we managed them. Slowly, imperfectly, but without catastrophe. I stayed in the Naperville house through Alice's first year, then sold it. Too much of the wrong kind of memory. I bought a smaller house in Evanston with a garden and a study with good north light. Alice had a room with yellow walls. With a portion of the inheritance, I funded a small literary imprint through my publishing house, a line dedicated to first-generation and underrepresented writers. My father's money finding a purpose. He'd been a careful man with land and money. I was a careful woman with words. I think he would have understood. Renata became Alice's godmother in a small June ceremony in the Evanston garden. Paul, Mara, Simone, Deb, and Joe were there. Biscuit, the golden retriever, reclaimed as part of the divorce with a firmness that had surprised even Patricia, slept on the grass. Marcus sold his stake in his brokerage partnership 18 months after the divorce. He relocated to a smaller apartment in Wicker Park, saw Alice on scheduled weekends, and paid child support on time every month. Danielle Marsh ended things with him approximately 6 weeks after the deposition. She moved to a firm in Minneapolis. I wished her nothing complicated. Sandra Reed called on Alice's first birthday to ask if she could send a gift. She sent a hand-knit blanket in pale yellow and white. Whatever her son had done, she was Alice's grandmother. That was a separate and uncomplicated fact. My life became something I hadn't expected, genuinely quiet, full, with work and Alice and friends, but free of the noise of crisis. I worked in my study with the north light. Alice grew. The garden had peonies in June. One morning, making coffee, I realized I was happy. Not in a dramatic, finally earned way, just happy. The ordinary, unremarkable, easily overlooked kind. I had learned that it is the most honest kind there is. What would you have done in my place? Leave a comment. I read every one. If this story reached you, subscribe. And thank you truly for listening to mine.